At 11:30 a.m., on December 22, 1944, 4 German officers approached the American lines outside Bastogne carrying a surrender demand. Their commander, General Heinrich von Luttwitz of the 47th Panzer Corps, declared that the Americans were surrounded by 7 German divisions, cut off from supplies, and had no hope of rescue. He offered them a chance to surrender honorably before being crushed by artillery and armor. The ultimatum was delivered to Brigadier General Anthony MacAuliffe, acting commander of the 101st Airborne Division, who had been resting when his staff woke him. After reading the message, MacAuliffe simply said, "Nuts." His officers assumed it was just his reaction, but he insisted it be the official reply. Lieutenant Colonel Harry Kinnard typed it, Colonel Joseph Harper delivered it, and when the confused Germans asked what nuts meant, Harper told them plainly, "It means the same as go to hell." That single word reflected something deeper about how the American army fought. Unlike most armies that dug in and waited for rescue when surrounded, American doctrine, shaped by decades of reform, taught immediate counterattack. This philosophy did not appear suddenly. It was the product of deliberate change, beginning when George C. Marshall became Army Chief of Staff on September 1, 1939, the same day Germany invaded Poland. Marshall inherited a weak force of 174,000 soldiers scattered across the world, equipped with outdated gear and trained mostly for ceremonial duties. But Marshall had seen modern warfare firsthand in World War I, and knew that unless the US Army changed how it trained, thought, and fought, it would not survive the next war. The roots of that change were planted years earlier when Marshall served at Fort Benning from 1927 to 1932. There he reshaped officer education, moving away from rigid classroom instruction and toward fast, pressure-driven tactical decision-making. The goal was to create officers who could act quickly, without waiting for perfect information or orders from above. He preached simplicity, speed, and initiative, qualities he saw missing in World War I. By the time Marshall became Chief of Staff, nearly 200 future generals had been shaped by his methods, including Bradley, Stilwell, Ridgway, and Smith. These officers, trained to think aggressively rather than defensively, would carry this doctrine into the Second World War. Marshall's philosophy was a break from the old tradition of waiting for perfect conditions before acting. At Fort Benning, he stripped away the slow, overcomplicated tactical exercises that dominated military education and replaced them with practical drills that forced officers to make fast decisions with minimal information. He believed that in real combat, there would never be enough time, never enough clarity, and never enough resources. Officers had to learn to act anyway. One of his key innovations was the tactical walk, where instructors would stop students in the field, give them a sudden scenario, and demand immediate orders. No written plans, no rehearsals. Just instinct, judgment, and speed. He valued officers who could think, not just those who memorized manuals. This approach produced leaders who were expected to take initiative rather than wait for orders. Marshall encouraged junior officers to attack when opportunities appeared, even if their actions deviated from the original plan. He taught that a flawed decision made quickly was better than a perfect decision made too late. These ideas spread through the army as his students became instructors and commanders. When Marshall was appointed Chief of Staff, he expanded this philosophy across the entire army. He removed more than 600 senior officers who resisted change, replacing them with younger, more aggressive leaders who embraced mobility and offensive action, men like Patton, Eisenhower, and Devers. Training shifted towards strenuous field exercises that emphasized rapid movement, independent decision-making, and attacking under pressure. This transformation was tested in the huge pre-war Louisiana maneuvers of 1940–41, involving almost 500,000 soldiers. For months, entire divisions maneuvered across thousands of square miles, practicing offensive operations, river crossings, combined arms tactics, and rapid redeployment. Marshall studied these exercises closely. The maneuvers proved that fast, aggressive action by flexible units consistently outperformed cautious, methodical approaches. Officers who pushed forward, exploited openings, and attacked immediately were most successful. Those who hesitated failed. By the time America entered World War II, in December 1941, the Army had grown from a small constabulary force into a massive, mobile organization trained to think offensively. Field Manual 100-5, published that year, codified Marshall's doctrine. The offense was decisive, the defense temporary, and counterattack the default response to enemy action. This doctrine stood in stark contrast to British, French, and Soviet approaches, which emphasized careful planning, strong defensive positions, and large-scale, centrally coordinated counteroffensives. The American approach prioritized speed over perfection, initiative over caution, and immediate action over deliberation. This aggressive philosophy produced a distinct American tactical culture. Recruits learned from the beginning that hesitation was dangerous and speed saved lives. Basic training emphasized battle drills centered on attacking, reacting to ambushes with forward assault, clearing positions immediately, and moving before the enemy could recover. Officer candidates at Fort Benning were pushed even harder, their course compressed years of schooling into months, with constant evaluations under pressure. They faced scenarios with no perfect answer and no time to gather complete information. The expectation was clear: make the best decision you can, right now, and act on it. This mindset created junior leaders who treated initiative as a responsibility, not an option. A lieutenant spotting an exposed enemy flank was expected to strike immediately, even if it meant diverting from an original plan. A captain finding an unexpected gap was expected to exploit it. Officers who acted boldly were promoted, those who hesitated were replaced. Marshall ensured the entire army understood that offensive action was not reckless, it was doctrine. The first major test came in February 1943, at the Battle of Kasserine Pass in North Africa. American forces suffered a sharp defeat and were driven back over 50 miles. British commanders expected the Americans to withdraw, reorganize, and plan a deliberate counteroffensive, the standard Allied response to a setback. Instead, American artillery was back in action within a day. Tank units refueled and re-engaged, scattered infantry reorganized and pushed toward the enemy. Within 72 hours, forces halted the German advance, launched counterattacks, and retook lost ground. The Germans withdrew after failing to achieve their goals. To British observers, the speed of the American recovery was startling. They viewed it as reckless, lacking preparation. But it reflected exactly what Marshall had built: an army that instinctively counterattacked to regain the initiative. Patton soon took command of 2 corps and reinforced this mindset, telling his officers that the quickest way to erase the effects of defeat was to attack again. Within a month, forces won their first clear victory against German troops in North Africa. American doctrine, immediate counterattack, constant pressure, decentralized initiative, was proving its value. By the time American troops reached Europe in 1944, this offensive spirit had become second nature. Units that landed in Normandy had been shaped by years of training that rewarded initiative and punished indecision. They had already fought in North Africa, Sicily, and Italy, refining the doctrine through harsh experience. Junior officers acted without waiting for permission because they understood the intent behind every mission. Keep the enemy under pressure, never let them reorganize, and strike before they strike you. When the Germans launched their massive Ardennes offensive on December 16, 1944, they achieved total surprise. Fog and snow grounded Allied aircraft, thin American lines were shattered, and German armored columns pushed more than 50 miles into Belgium. Many American units were scattered, some surrounded, and some destroyed outright. To the German High Command, this looked like the moment that would split the Allied armies and force a political crisis. But the Germans had not accounted for what American doctrine would produce under pressure. Rather than collapsing and falling back, small American units all across the Ardennes immediately counterattacked. From isolated crossroads to tiny Belgian villages, groups of 5, 10, or 20 soldiers launched local assaults that disrupted German formations, slowed armored columns, and forced enemy commanders to deploy instead of advancing. Most of these counterattacks did not win outright, but they stole time. They bought hours the Germans could not afford to lose. preventing them from reaching the Meuse River before Allied reinforcements arrived. At the higher levels, American commanders wasted no time either. Within hours, Eisenhower began shifting entire divisions toward the breakthrough, not to dig in, but to counterattack the German advance. On December 19th, at a tense meeting in Verdun, Eisenhower shocked his own generals by describing the crisis as a great opportunity because the Germans were out of their fortifications and vulnerable. When he asked Patton how fast Third Army could turn north and attack, Patton famously replied, 48 hours. Against all expectation, he meant it. Patton had anticipated a German offensive and had already prepared 3 complete contingency plans for a rapid 90-degree turn. As soon as Eisenhower authorized the move, Patton's staff executed the plans through the night. Junior officers adapted supply routes, repositioned artillery, and organized massive troop movements without waiting for detailed instructions. The sheer speed of the maneuver stunned military planners. What should have taken weeks was accomplished in less than 3 days. At dawn on December 22nd, just 66 hours after the order, 3 divisions of Third Army were already attacking north into the German flank. Meanwhile, the defenders of Bastogne, cut off and heavily outnumbered, showed the same instinctive aggressiveness. Instead of shrinking into a static defensive pocket, the mixed force of airborne troops, armor, and support units conducted constant raids, spoiling attacks and counter-assaults. Every German probe was met with an immediate local counterattack. Every artillery position the Americans could identify was raided or hit. Patrols hunted infiltrators at night. Even surrounded, low on supplies and freezing in the dark forests, the Americans acted like the attackers, not the besieged. This mindset, this refusal to await rescue, this insistence on taking the initiative under any conditions, was not spontaneous bravery. It was the direct result of 2 decades of doctrine, training, and leadership built around the belief that offense, speed, and initiative were the keys to victory. The Germans expected a cornered opponent to collapse or negotiate. Instead, they found an enemy who treated every setback as a signal to attack. This was why McAuliffe's nuts reply made perfect sense to the Americans at Bastogne. It was not bravado, it was simply the culture they lived by. Patton's forces reached Bastogne on December 26. Their lead tank, nicknamed Cobra King, breaking through the German encirclement after days of brutal winter fighting. The arrival of Third Army reopened the road, but the moment relief arrived, the pattern repeated. The defenders, exhausted and half-frozen, immediately shifted from holding the line to pushing outward, attacking German positions to widen the corridor. There was no pause to reorganize, no long recovery period. The same soldiers who had fought non-stop for a week in a surrounded town went straight back on the offensive within hours. German commanders were stunned. They had assumed the Americans would need time to rest before resuming combat. They did not understand that this relentless pace was exactly how the U.S. Army had been designed to fight. Across the Ardennes, this aggressive approach shaped the broader battle. American units counterattacked repeatedly, even after being driven back. If the Germans created a gap, the Americans filled it. If the Germans seized a village, nearby units launched hasty assaults to take it back. If German armor threatened a road, American artillery responded instantly, often firing danger-close missions without waiting for formal approval. Everywhere the Germans tried to advance, they ran into an enemy who refused to yield time or space. The result was a grinding loss of momentum that the German offensive could not afford. By late January, the Bulge had been erased, and the German army in the west had bled out fuel, tanks, and manpower it could never replace. After the war, American analysts studied the conflict and concluded that Marshall's reforms were decisive. Training that forced quick decisions under pressure produced officers who could respond instantly when communications broke down. Doctrine that encouraged junior leaders to act independently allowed small units to delay, disrupt, and counterattack without waiting for guidance. An emphasis on offense ensured that American forces kept the initiative even when outnumbered or surrounded. These principles remained central to U.S. doctrine through Korea, Vietnam, and into modern conflicts. Manuals continued teaching that the correct response to an ambush was to assault through it. Officer schools continued emphasizing initiative with incomplete information. The core ideas that saved Bastogne, speed aggression, decentralized decision-making, became permanent features of American military culture. By the end of the war, Germany's commanders understood the difference. They wrote in after-action reports that American forces were uniquely difficult to fight because they attacked constantly, counterattacked immediately, and never allowed German units time to regroup. Soviet offensives relied on overwhelming mass, British operations relied on careful preparation. American units relied on momentum, keeping the enemy off balance at every moment. This exhausted German formations already short on supplies and stretched thin across multiple fronts. The legacy of Bastogne and the Bulge was not just the legend of McAuliffe's nuts or Patton's rapid relief. It was the proof that doctrine mattered more than any single battle. The American army had been built to act fast, seize initiative, and accept risk. What happened in December 1944 was the natural outcome of years of training officers to think independently, soldiers to act aggressively, and commanders to trust subordinates to execute intent without waiting for permission. It was not luck, nor accident, nor a one-time miracle. It was the system working exactly as it was designed. And so the story ends where it began, with a simple one-word reply. The Germans believed they were offering a trapped enemy a final chance to surrender. But the Americans at Bastogne were not thinking about giving up. They were thinking about how to hit back. That attitude, shaped by doctrine, forged in training and proven in battle, helped turn the tide in the Ardennes and contributed to the final collapse of German forces in the West. The principles Marshall set in motion at Fort Benning